Chapter 5. 2 days after Billy had blasted the alien into space, Bueller picked up radio transmissions. The signals were on the military band and coded, so they didn't know what was being said, but from the strength, they had to be close. Unfortunately, the ship did not have any transmitters they could use, only receivers. It didn't take Wilkes long to figure out where the signals originated. "Hello?" he said. "Looky here." Billy leaned over his shoulder as Wilkes played with the computer screen. "Got us a planetoid. Not much bigger than a moon, but in direct orbit around the local primary. Been on the opposite side of the sun from us pretty much since we left the chambers. That's why we couldn't see it." Numbers crawled up on the screen. Wilkes did something, and the tiny blotch expanded and took on a roughly spherical shape, overlaid with grid lines. "Colonial Marine Base?" Bueller said. "Yep, that'd be my guess. Inflate a few pressure domes, pump 'em full of breathable, bury a couple of gravity generators, and you've got all the comforts of home. Provided you grew up in a barracks. Military has hundreds of these bases scattered around the galaxy. Or did have." "Is that where we're going?" Billy asked. "I don't see anywhere else, kid. If these crappy rangefinders can be believed, we'll be there in a couple of more days." The three of them stared at the computer-augmented image. Billy wondered if they were thinking the same thing she was. Was this a place of refuge? Or were they leaping from the frying pan and into the fire? It looked as if they were soon going to find out. These damn gravity drives were something, Wilkes had to admit. They were moving at speeds the old reaction ships couldn't touch. As they approached the planetoid, it was about the same size as Terra's moon. The constant drone of the engines shut down. The ship turned and began to retro, slowing their descent towards the only sizable chunk of real estate around for 150 million clicks. There was some rumble from the rockets, but compared to the thrum of the gravity drives, the ship was quiet. He had tuned the vibrations out, but now they were still. He missed them. "Might as well use that water we have left to clean up," Wilkes said. "We want to look good for the party." "Yeah, especially since they aren't expecting company," Billy said. He shrugged. Despite his banter, Wilkes was nervous. They were a long way from what any of them knew as home. Their reception was questionable. The ship fell towards the tiny planet. The gravity increased as the military-industrial strength generators on the base enveloped them within their fields. Bueller shut off the ship's faux G, and it got a little more comfortable. The landing was rough. The ship fell straight in on its tail, the retros firing. Apparently it navigated some kind of gigantic hatched roof and wound up in a bay. The ship vibrated as compressors pumped air into the bay. When there was enough atmosphere, they could hear the machinery. His back was still pretty tender, but Wilkes could walk on his own. Bueller rode in his cradle strapped to a wheeled hand truck that Billy had found. The aft cargo bay registered breathable air, and the three passengers made their way into it as the loading ramp was lowered from outside. The hydraulics whined as the back of the ship yawed wide open, and the ramp grated to a halt. It was cold, but the air felt fresher than what they'd been used to. A squad of Colonial Marines in combat gear stood there, carbines held ready. At the sight of them, the 4 Marines snapped their carbines up. Behind them, an officer sat in an electric cart, a fat cigar stuck in his mouth. He wore duty fatigues, and the gold braid on his visored cap identified him as a light general, a brigadier. "At ease!" the general yelled. He stepped from the cart. He was medium height, but powerfully built, with the body of a weightlifter. He wore an Opchan command headset, the bone phone and mouthpiece a single sculptured unit. He had an antique stainless 10mm auto pistol with full Santoprene grips in a hip holster. The sleeves of his fatigues were rolled up to reveal several tattoos on his forearms. On the left, a rampant screaming eagle and chains. On the right, the Colonial Marine emblem, and a dagger and banner. A rainbow hollow patch shimmering on his left breast said, T. Spears. The general moved to stand in front of them. "I didn't expect to see you ambulatory," he said. Wilkes blinked. Nobody knew they were on the ship. If the general was expecting to see somebody not ambulatory, then he had to know about the human cargo. "If you're talking about the 4 people in the freezers, that isn't us," Wilkes said. "Sir." The general raised one bushy eyebrow. "Say what, Marine? Download it." "We just came along for the ride," Wilkes said. The general nodded. "All right." To the Marine standing by, he said, "Maxwell, Dowling, go check on the cargo." "If you're talking about the 4 men in the sleep chambers, you're wasting your time," Billy said. "They were infected by aliens." Billy wasn't slow. Wilkes realized she also understood what the officer meant. "Were infected?" "The aliens ate their way out. The men are dead." Wilkes could see that the general didn't care a lizard's ass about the men. The general frowned. "What about the aliens?" Before Wilkes could stop her, Billy said, "We killed them." The general's jaw muscles bunched. Wilkes thought he was going to bite his cigar in half. "What? You killed my specimens?" It was Billy's turn to blink. "Your specimens?" "It was them or us," Bueller put in. The general stared down at Bueller. "Listen, Vatscat, I've got a base full of people. I don't need any more. What I needed were those Terran-bred specimens. I needed to have my R&D people studying possible mutations. There's a war on, mister, in case you haven't heard. You just fouled up a Priority 1 mission. I could have you shot for that." Wilkes stared at the general. He pulled the cigar from his mouth, tapped ash from it. "Put these 3 in isomed and scan them," he said. "Maybe they're infected and trying to hide it. We might salvage something yet." He tapped the command headset. "Powell, get down here. We've got a snafu." The barrel of the carbine jabbed Wilkes in his tender back. He fought the urge to spin and smash the Marine who'd prodded him. He managed to keep a grip on himself. No point in getting blasted by one of his own after coming all this way. He'd go along. Maybe later he could figure out what the hell was what. One of the Marines pushed Bueller's carriage. The other kept his weapon trained on Billy and Wilkes. Billy didn't understand what was going on. They went down a descending corridor. When they rounded the end, they were on the edge of a large room. Billy gasped. Against the far wall was a row of clear cylinders. The 6 tubes were 4 meters tall, perhaps 2.5 meters in circumference. There was some kind of pale, bluish, transparent liquid in the containers. Each of the cylinders contained a full-size alien drone. Billy found that she was digging her fingers into Wilkes's arm. "Jesus," Wilkes said. The Marine with the carbine pointed at him and said, "Not to worry, Sarge. Those babies are in suspension. That's fluoropolymer fluid. They're alive, but they ain't going nowhere." Billy saw a dozen smaller containers lined up on a long table nearby. Each of those had one of the crab-like alien hatchlings in it, ovipositors drooling limply under the fingerbone-like jointed legs. Several techs in osmotic clean suits stood or sat at the table. Billy, who had spent years in hospitals, recognized microscopes, surgical lasers, autoclaves, and other medical impedimenta. Billy felt a wave of nausea. They were doing research on the aliens. Why? To learn how to kill them better? That had to be it, didn't it? Why else would they be doing it?